Picture New Orleans in 1918. It's a city alive with energy, but a new, terrifying presence is starting to stalk its streets. Someone is breaking into homes late at night, not to steal, but simply to kill. His method is as brutal as it is bizarre. He uses his victims' own tools, often their own axes, against them. After a reign of terror that held the city in a grip of fear, this phantom, dubbed the Axeman, vanished without a trace, leaving behind a blood-soaked legacy and one of America's most chilling unsolved mysteries. The nightmare began on the night of May 23, 1918. Joseph and Catherine Maggio were asleep in the small apartment behind the grocery store they ran. An intruder got in by chiseling out a lower panel of their back door, a terrifying signature that would soon become all too familiar. The scene inside was one of pure butchery. Both Joseph and Catherine had their throats slit with a razor that was found covered in blood at the scene. As if that wasn't enough, the killer then used an axe to deliver crushing blows to their heads. The bloody axe was left behind, but nothing of value was taken. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This was calculated, personal, and it was only the beginning. The city didn't have to wait long for the Axeman to strike again. Just over a month later, on June 27th, Louis Bissumer and his partner, Harriet Lowe, were brutally bludgeoned in their home. They miraculously survived the initial attack, but the city's fear was starting to solidify. The killer's method was sickeningly familiar: a chiseled door panel and an axe left at the scene. The attacks kept coming. On August 5th, Anna Schneider, who was 8 months pregnant, was attacked in her bed, though she thankfully survived. Just 5 days later, on August 10th, an elderly man named Joseph Romano wasn't so lucky. He was found dead from a massive head wound, another victim of the phantom who crept into homes in the dead of night. By now, a horrifying pattern was impossible to ignore. The Axeman always seemed to get in through a back door by removing a panel with a chisel. He'd then find a weapon inside the home, usually an axe, and leave it behind as a bloody calling card. And most chillingly, he seemed to be targeting the city's Italian-American grocers. This detail fueled early speculation, but the sheer brutality didn't fit any known motive, leaving police baffled and a community terrified. The police chief was convinced a single deranged individual was responsible, a fiend who was stalking the city. As 1919 rolled in, the Axeman's bloody work crossed the Mississippi River into the small community of Gretna. On the night of March 10th, he broke into the home of the Cortimiglia family. Like many of his victims, they were Italian grocers. Charles and Rosie Cortimiglia were viciously attacked with an axe. They would survive their horrific head wounds, but their 2-year-old daughter Mary was killed by a single brutal blow. The murder of a child sent a fresh wave of shock and outrage through the region. The community demanded answers, and the pressure on law enforcement was immense. The Axeman was no longer just a New Orleans problem. He was a monster whose shadow loomed over everyone. With every new attack, the panic in New Orleans became a palpable living thing. Families barricaded their doors, people started sleeping with weapons by their beds, and a cloud of suspicion hung over the entire city. The Axeman was the only thing anyone could talk about. While the New Orleans police were sure they were hunting a lone serial killer, officials in Gretna weren't so convinced, which created friction between the departments. This division, combined with a total lack of solid leads, meant the Axeman could continue to operate freely, holding the entire region hostage with the threat of his next unpredictable strike. Then, on March 13, 1919, the case took a turn that would become the stuff of legend. A letter, claiming to be from the killer himself, showed up at the Times-Picayune newspaper. It was arrogant, taunting, and utterly terrifying. "They have never caught me, and they never will," it began. "I am not a human being, but a spirit and a demon from the hottest hell." The writer went on to mock the police and threaten his next attack. But he also made a very strange and now infamous proclamation. He declared his love for jazz music and issued a challenge to the city. On the following Tuesday night, March 19th, he would pass through New Orleans once again. He promised to spare anyone in a home where a jazz band was playing. One thing is certain, the letter warned, and that is that some of those persons who do not jazz it out on that specific Tuesday night will get the axe. Whether the letter was real or a twisted prank is still debated, but the people of New Orleans weren't taking any chances. That Tuesday night, the city erupted with music. Dance halls were packed, and hundreds of homes, from mansions to shotgun shacks, blared jazz into the night. And, true to the letter's promise, no one was attacked. For one night, the city of New Orleans may have saved itself with music, creating one of the strangest chapters in the history of American crime. While the city was obsessed with the mythical figure of the Axeman, a very real human tragedy was unfolding in Gretna. In the chaos after the attack on her family, a grieving and disoriented Rosie Cortimiglia accused her neighbors and business rivals, an elderly man named Orlando Giordano and his son Frank. There was no physical evidence connecting them to the crime. The only thing the prosecution had was Rosie's testimony. Despite the shaky foundation of the case, a week-long trial ended with a shocking verdict. Orlando was sentenced to life in prison, and his son Frank was sentenced to death. But nearly a year later, the entire case fell apart. Rosie Cortimiglia took back her testimony, publicly confessing, "I lied. God forgive me. It was not the Giordanos." She claimed that hatred and pressure had driven her to falsely accuse them. The Giordanos were released in December 2020, but their lives were shattered. It was a grim reminder of how fear and prejudice can lead to a profound miscarriage of justice. Even after that infamous jazz night, the Axeman wasn't done. On August 10, 1919, a grocer named Steve Boca woke up to a dark figure standing over his bed. He was struck in the head with an axe, but miraculously survived, though he had no memory of his attacker. Less than a month later, on September 3rd, a young woman named Sarah Lauman was also attacked with an axe in her home. She, too, survived with no memory of the event. The final confirmed attack came on October 27, 1919. Mike Pepitone, another grocer, was killed in his bedroom, his head smashed by a heavy weapon. But this attack had a strange twist. Pepitone's wife claimed she saw two men fleeing the scene, a detail that flew in the face of the lone killer theory. And then, silence. After the murder of Mike Pepitone, the attacks that had terrorized New Orleans and its surrounding communities for over a year and a half just stopped. There was no final message, no climactic capture. The killer who preyed on the city so consistently vanished as mysteriously as he had first appeared. Over 100 years later, the identity of the Axeman of New Orleans is still a mystery. But that hasn't stopped the theories from piling up. One of the most common is that the attacks were Mafia-related, perhaps hits carried out by the Black Hand, an extortion syndicate. The focus on Italian grocers seems to support this, but the Axeman's methods, that extreme up-close brutality, weren't typical of organized crime. Another theory suggests that the killer was simply a sadist. Criminologists have pointed out that in cases where a man and woman were attacked together, the woman often suffered the more vicious assault, suggesting the killer was a man who only killed other men when they got in his way. Some researchers point to inconsistencies, like the two men supposedly seen at the Pepitone crime scene, to argue there may have been multiple killers or even copycats at work. The most famous suspect, a man named Joseph Mumfree, was eventually shot and killed by the widow of Mike Pepitone, but there has never been concrete evidence to link him to all the Axeman's crimes. Ultimately, the police never nailed down a suspect, and the Axeman was never caught. He likely stopped for one of the simple reasons that often end these kinds of sprees. He died, was jailed for another crime, or just moved away. The Axeman of New Orleans left at least 5 people dead and more than a dozen wounded, but his true legacy is the chilling mystery he left. He was a phantom who broke into homes with terrifying ease, turned his victims' own tools against them, and taunted an entire city with a bizarre letter. Then, without a word, he was gone. He remains a terrifying figure, not just for the crimes he committed, but for the questions he left behind. For over 100 years, his identity has been a blank space in the annals of true crime. Who was this demon who loved jazz? A lone madman, a mob enforcer, or a ghost created by a city's own fear? We may never know for certain. What do you think is the most plausible theory? Who was the Axeman? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this mystery as fascinating as we do, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more explorations of history's greatest unsolved cases.